Hello, dear listeners. You are safe now. The room you're in is quiet. The doors are locked. The world outside is still. But the quiet you hear is a lie. Because right now, as you listen, there is a piece of evidence, a single fiber, a half-print, a whisper of DNA. Sitting in a darkened storage room in Boulder, Colorado. It has been waiting since 1996. It knows exactly what happened in the basement of that Tudor home on the night after Christmas. And it is the only witness that has never told a lie. This is the story of a 6-year-old beauty queen, a ransom note longer than the demands of a nation, and a crime scene so contaminated by grief, terror, and procedural missteps that it became a black hole, swallowing the truth whole. This is not just a cold case. This is a forensic paradox, a labyrinth built of human error and human evil, where every exit is sealed by a different theory. And the center holds a child who never got to grow up. The answer is waiting, deep in the archive silence. And we're going to listen. It begins, as it so often does, with Voice in the Dark. 5:52 a.m., December 26, 1996. The Ramsey household is not quiet. Patsy Ramsey's voice is a wire stretched to its breaking point, vibrating with a terror so pure it crackles down the phone line. To the Boulder police dispatcher. "We have a kidnapping," she cries. There's a note. It says SBTC Victory. "Please." The dispatcher tries to impose order. Is her daughter missing? "Yes." Patsy shrieks. But listen closer. Listen past the panic. In 1997, enhanced audio analysis of that 911 tape would reveal something the dispatcher never heard. In the background, after Patsy thinks she is hung up, 3 distinct voices are audible. A man's voice, low and tense. "We're not speaking to you." A child's voice, faint. "What did you find?" And then, most chillingly, Patsy's own voice, no longer hysterical, but flat, detached. "Okay, we've called the police, now what?" Then the click. This 86-second audio hauntology became a forensic ghost. Who was speaking? Were the voices, as some experts later posited, merely auditory pareidolia, the brain seeking pattern in noise? Or was it the unguarded, damning aftermath of a stage performance, captured by a telephone handset that hadn't fully disengaged? This anomaly defies the official narrative of a frantic mother discovering a kidnapping. It suggests a conversation, a coordination, a moment of chilling normalcy in the eye of a manufactured storm. The 911 call is the overture to the symphony of chaos that would follow. It sets the tone. Nothing is what it first seems. Every piece of evidence in this case carries a dual signature, one of the crime and one of the contamination that followed. The call is the first brushstroke on a canvas of confusion. It asks the foundational, terrifying question. In a moment of ultimate crisis, does the human animal scream truth, or does it perform? The tape holds its secret. The voices, real or imagined, are a gateway. And as the police cars finally converged on 755 15th Street, they were not heading to a crime scene. They were entering a stage, already set for a tragedy, in 3 acts. The ransom note. It lies on the spiral staircase, 3 pages long, 372 words. It is a document of such bizarre, rambling fiction that it immediately becomes the case's central nervous system. It demands $118,000, a curiously specific sum, almost exactly the amount of John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus. It warns, we are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. It pontificates, you are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. It concludes with the dramatic victory, SPDC. The note is a masterpiece of misdirection. But misdirection from what? From the very beginning, it felt off. Forensic linguists in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit would later dissect its verbose, movie quote-laden prose. Phrases lifted directly from films like Dirty Harry, Ransom, and Speed. It was written on a legal pad found in the Ramsey home, with a sharper pen from a cup in the kitchen. The author practiced the first few lines on the same pad. This was not the work of a small foreign faction. This was domestic, in every sense of the word. The length alone is a forensic paradox. A genuine kidnapper, inside the victim's home, writes a short, direct note. They do not linger, crafty a novella, exposing themselves to discovery with every passing minute. They do not use the family's own materials. This note was composed in situ with leisure, with a kind of theatrical flourish. It points not to a professional, but to a performer. It was the first and most elaborate piece of stage dressing. It attempted to create a reality, a kidnapping by sophisticated terrorists, so compelling it would overwrite the much simpler, more horrible truth lying in the basement. The note is the intruder that never was given voice. It is a psychological profile in ink, and it raises a question that would haunt the investigation. Did the author know they were writing fiction, or were they, in that moment of extreme psychological dissociation, believing their own story? The pen waited in the cup, the paper waited on the pad, and someone in the deep silence of that night sat down and wrote a manifesto for a ghost. For 7 hours, the narrative held. JonBenet was kidnapped. Police searched the home perfunctorily, awaiting the kidnapper's call. They did not find her. At approximately 1 p.m., exhausted, detached from the chaos, John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White descended to the basement to check the windows. It was a cursory look, but then John pushed open the door to a small, windowless room used as a wine cellar. A white blanket, a flash of sequins, JonBenet's body. In a moment of catastrophic, irreversible error, John Ramsey swept his daughter's rigid form into his arms, carried her upstairs, and laid her on the living room floor. In doing so, he destroyed the sanctity of the crime scene's epicenter. He contaminated her body with his own fibers and touch. He disrupted potential trace evidence on the blanket, on the floor, around her. The official chain of custody, the sacred protocol that links evidence to truth in a court of law, was shattered before it even began. This act, born of paternal anguish, is perhaps the most understandable and yet most forensically damning moment of the entire day. It cemented a pattern. The Ramseys, whether out of shock, guilt, or privilege, would repeatedly act in ways that compromised the investigation, and the police, seemingly overawed by the family's stature, allowed it. The scene was no longer pure. The body's original position, the precise arrangement of the blanket, the possibility of latent evidence around her, all were lost, translated to the filter of a father's trauma. The discovery itself is a dark puzzle. Why did earlier official police searches miss the body? Was it a failure of protocol, a symptom of the kidnapping mindset that blinded them? Or was the body not there during those initial searches? The moment John Ramsey crossed that threshold, the case bifurcated. There was a physical truth, now forever altered, and there was a performative truth, the story that would be told. From this point on, every piece of evidence would have to be viewed through the lens of that contamination. The basement room was a silent, stone-cold witness, but by the time the detectives finally looked, the witness had already been spoken for. The body told its own grim story. JonBenet Ramsey died of asphyxiation due to ligature strangulation, combined with massive skull fracture. The ligature was a garrote, a length of white cord wrapped around her neck, tied to a broken paintbrush handle from Patsy's Art Supplies, used as a toggle to tighten the noose. It was a crude, brutal, hands-on weapon, but was it a tool of murder or a macabre prop? The head wound was severe, likely delivered by a heavy blow with a blunt object, perhaps the same flashlight found on the kitchen counter. The official paradox, which came first, the blow, which would have been immediately incapacitating and likely fatal, or the strangulation, a slower, more controlled act? Some forensic experts, like renowned pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, have argued the staging theory. The head blow was the actual cause of death, perhaps accidental. The strangulation, with an elaborate, almost nautical knot, was then added to support the kidnapping narrative, to make the death look like the work of a sadistic intruder. Then there's a purported stun gun. Burn-like marks on JonBenet's back and face were theorized by some, including independent investigator Lou Smith, to be from a commercial stun gun, a tool of an intruder to subdue her. But subsequent testing and medical analysis suggested they could be from something else, the texture material of the toy, or even post-mortem artifacts. The stun gun theory creates an intruder with specific tools. The absence of a confirmed stun gun model that perfectly matches the wounds leaves it as another haunting maybe. Every artifact on and around the body becomes a Rorschach test. The paintbrush handle screams inside job, a weapon of opportunity from home. The cord could be from anywhere. The knots were analyzed by naval experts. Some were simple, one was more complex. Were they tied by someone with knowledge, or by someone following a mental image of what a killer's knot should look like? The violence is both extreme and curiously indirect. It speaks of rage, of panic, of a desperate need to explain. The tools are the grammar of the crime, and we are still learning how to read them. In the beginning, it was the Holy Grail, a minuscule amount of DNA, found in 1997 during testing on the crotch of JonBenét's long johns. A mixed profile, primarily her own, but with a tiny component from an unknown male, dubbed Unknown Male 1. Later, a drop of blood in her underwear yielded a more complete, though still tiny, profile from an unknown male. This became the cornerstone of the Ramsey family's defense and the intruder theory's best evidence. This, they argued, was the genetic signature of the real killer. For years, it was an immovable object. Then came the genetic genealogy revolution. The Golden State Killer identified in 2018. Dozens of cold cases cracking open like ice in spring. In 2023, the Boulder District Attorney announced a new genetic genealogy push on the Ramsey case DNA. The hope was palpable. This would be the end. But 2024 came and went. And as of 2025, the DNA has not named a name. Why? The answer is in the scale. The sample is incredibly low template, possibly degraded, and mixed. It could be a composite. Genetic genealogy requires a much more robust, single-source profile to upload to public databases and find familial matches. This sample may simply be too faint, too ambiguous. Worse, there is a terrifying forensic possibility. The DNA is not from the killer at all. It could be what's known as touch DNA or transfer DNA, infinitesimal skin cells transferred during the manufacturing, packaging, or handling of the underwear long before that night. A factory worker in Asia, a store clerk. It is a ghost in the machine, a scientific fact that points nowhere and everywhere. Its very existence exonerates no one definitively, yet its lack of a match convicts no one. It is the perfect modern mystery, a scientific truth that clarifies nothing. It has created a 25-year stalemate. The DNA is both the key and the lock. It whispers of an outsider, yet it clings with the tenacity of a memory. And so, the wait continues. In a lab somewhere, machines hum, searching for a familial echo of one Mauritanian Ugia across millions of genetic data points. The search is a monument to our faith in science. But what if science, this time, is only showing us our own reflection in a very old, very dirty mirror? While physical evidence faltered, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, turned their lens on the human puzzle. They didn't look for fibers. They looked for motive, for trauma, for the story beneath the story. Their assessment, delivered early on, was stark. The ransom note was the Rosetta Stone. Its length, its personal knowledge, the bonus amount, the use of Patsy's phrasing, and hence, its practice drafts, its theatricality, all screamed that the author was Patsy Ramsey. The BAU believed the note was written after JonBenet was dead, to explain a death that was never intended to be a murder. The crime scene to them was a psychic drama staged to make sense of a terrible accident. The head blow, perhaps from a moment of rage or a frantic gesture, rendered JonBenet unconscious, believing her dead or dying. A parent in a state of profound psychological shock and panic staged the kidnapping and strangulation to cover the act. This profile fit the statistical reality. When a child is killed in the home, the perpetrator is almost always a family member. The BAU saw not a sophisticated intruder, but a family in meltdown. They noted the Ramseys' immediate lawyering up, their refusal to be interviewed separately for months, their media campaign, all behaviors inconsistent with grieving parents of a kidnapped child, but consistent with the defensive posture of the guilty. The profile was a shadow portrait. It didn't rely on a single fingerprint, but on 1,000 human tells. It asked, who benefits from a narrative of an intruder? Who had the knowledge to write that note? Who had the emotional investment to stage such an elaborate, horrific scene? The answer, drawn from the dark science of criminal motivation, pointed inward to the heart of the home. It was a theory of intimacy, not invasion, and it created a schism in the investigation that would never heal. The physical detectives versus the psychological profilers. One side looked for a monster in the bushes. The other saw a monster in the mirror. But one man looked at the same evidence and saw a completely different story. His name was Lou Smith, a legendary, devoutly Christian homicide detective brought out of retirement to work the case. Smith saw not a stage scene, but a violently authentic one. He saw the pry mark on a basement window, though no forced entry was conclusively proven. He saw the scuff mark on the wall below it. He saw the suitcase placed beneath it as a step. He saw the spiderweb across the window, undisturbed. He saw the stun gun marks. He saw an intruder who entered before the family returned home that Christmas night, hid, wrote the note, waited, took JonBenet from her bed, assaulted and killed her in the basement, and left the way he came. Smith's theory was a gospel of the unknown. He painstakingly mapped the intruder's path, a ghostly itinerary through the house. He believed the DNA was the killer's. He believed the garrote was the weapon of a sadist. He resigned from the task force in protest, convinced the Ramseys were being wrongly persecuted. Smith's legacy is powerful. He represents a detective as believer, the investigator who follows the evidence away from the obvious into the shadows. He asked the unsettling questions a family theory couldn't easily answer. If the Ramseys staged it, why choose such a brutal, sexualized method of staging? Why the garrote? Why not just call an ambulance for an accidental fall? Smith's intruder is a phantom, but a consistent one, a pedophile who knew the house, perhaps through the Christmas home tour the Ramseys had given, who planned the crime for the chaotic night after Christmas. His theory is clean in its way. It puts the evil outside. It restores the family to victimhood. It is a story the ransom note wants you to believe. But for it to be true, an intruder of almost supernatural stealth and luck had to move through that home, leaving only the faintest of traces, composing a 3-page letter under extreme stress, and vanish without a single reliable sighting. Smith looked for the footsteps of a ghost, and he found just enough disturbance in the dust to keep the haunting alive. The case didn't just break. It detonated across the American psyche, and the catalyst was a single relentless image. JonBenet in full pageant makeup, in sequin costumes, performing with a coyness far beyond her years. Cable news was in its ascendancy. The 24-hour cycle needed a story, and this was a perfect storm. A beautiful, wealthy, white child, a violent mystery, a strange world of child beauty pageants. The media didn't just report the case. They became a character in it. They framed the narrative. Pageant mom, wealthy CO father, strange brother. The Ramseys' every move was analyzed not just by police, but by talking heads. Patsy's televised pleas, the family CNN interview. These were not just appeals for help. They were performances in a global courtroom. The public, fed a diet of sensational imagery, rendered its verdict early. The parents were guilty. The pageant videos were presented as evidence of a twisted, sexualized upbringing that could only lead to tragedy. This media storm had a concrete, devastating effect on the investigation. It poisoned the jury pool forever. It forced the police to operate under a blinding spotlight, making them hesitant, prone to leaks, and vulnerable to public pressure. It also gave the Ramseys a powerful platform for their counter-narrative. They hired a high-powered PR team. They wrote a book. They used the very circus that condemned them to proclaim their innocence. The case became a feedback loop of speculation, where theory hardened into fact in the public mind long before any court could convene. The truth was no longer something to be found in a lab. It was something to be argued on talk shows. JonBenet the child vanished, replaced by JonBenet, the symbol of lost innocence, of parental sin, of media gluttony. The evidence room was quiet, but outside, the noise was deafening, and it drowned out the whispers of the actual crime. In 1999, after nearly 3 years of investigation, a Boulder County grand jury, having heard hundreds of witnesses and reviewed thousands of pieces of evidence, reached a decision. It was a secret. For a decade, the world believed the grand jury had simply declined to indict, a crushing blow to the prosecution. But in 2013, a report by the Boulder Daily Camera forced the release of documents revealing the shocking truth. The grand jury had voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death and of being accessories to a crime. They believed the evidence showed the parents had placed JonBenet in a situation that led to her death and had then covered it up. But the then district attorney, Alex Hunter, refused to sign the indictment. He believed he could not prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. In that moment, the judicial system blinked. The most formal accusatory body in the land said, "We believe there is probable cause to prosecute these parents." And the state's top prosecutor said, "But we will lose." It was the ultimate admission of the case's fatal weakness. Not a lack of suspicion, but a surplus of reasonable doubt woven into the fabric of the case from the moment John Ramsey lifted his daughter's body. The secret indictment is the legal ghost of this case. It is the what if that hangs over everything. Had Hunter signed it, the Ramseys would have gone to trial. A narrative, however imperfect, would have been tested in court. A verdict, however controversial, would have been reached. Instead, the case was left in a purgatory of official suspicion without resolution. It proved that in the American system, even when the machinery of justice grinds all the way to an indictment, it can still be stopped by one man's doubt. The grand jury heard the whispers in the dark. They pointed a finger, and then the lights were turned off, and everyone was told to go home. There's a third person in the house that night, often relegated to the background. Burke Ramsey, JonBenet's older brother, 9 years old at the time. In the early hours, he was reportedly asleep in his bed, unaware. He was interviewed briefly, childlike, but as the years passed and other theories faced dead ends, a sinister third option emerged, pushed into the mainstream by documentaries and independent investigators. What if Burke did it? The theory is a house of cards built on disturbing nuance. It suggests a sibling rivalry, an accidental blow, perhaps with a flashlight during a fight over a piece of pineapple found partially eaten in the kitchen that night. The head trauma is inflicted, not with murderous intent, but with the uncontrolled rage of a child. The parents then discover the scene. To protect their surviving son from a lifetime of scrutiny, from being taken away, from the scandal, they staged a kidnapping and strangulation. The garrote, in this theory, is part of that horrific cover-up, making the unthinkable accident look like the work of a monster. The ransom note is Patsy's desperate fiction to explain the inexplicable. This theory answers some stubborn questions. Why stage such a sexually suggestive crime? Because adults would assume a pedophile intruder. Why not call an ambulance? Because the child was clearly irreversibly dead from the head wound. It also leans on later analyses of Burke's childhood interviews, where some body language experts see deception, and on the infamous 911 call, where the child's voice asking, "What did you find?" is interpreted as Burke's. It is the darkest family theory of all, for it paints the parents not as killers, but as accomplices to a cover-up of a tragic, childish act. It asks us to believe in a chain of parental decisions so catastrophic, so cold, that they chose to garrote their daughter's body to save their son. It turns a home into a bunker of shared, terrible secrets. And it leaves Burke Ramsey, now an adult, living under a cloud of internet-fueled suspicion no court will ever dispel. He is a permanent person of interest in the court of public opinion, tried by theory, not evidence. Forensic science can sometimes find truth in the most mundane of places. In JonBenet's stomach and duodenum, during the autopsy, were found traces of undigested pineapple. The Ramsey parents stated they came home from a Christmas party around 9:30 p.m., put the children straight to bed, and JonBenet was asleep when carried inside. They said she was not fed. But on the kitchen table in the morning, police found a bowl with pineapple and milk with a serving spoon. Patsy's fingerprints were on the bowl. Burke's fingerprints were on the tea glass beside it. This pineapple is a tiny, fibrous clock. Digestion halts at death. The state of the pineapple in her gut suggested she ate it approximately 1 to 2 hours before she died. If the Ramseys' timeline was correct, she could not have eaten it. Therefore, the timeline was wrong. Someone was awake in that kitchen, eating pineapple with JonBenet in the deep of the night. This seemingly trivial detail is a tectonic crack in the family story. It places JonBenet, awake and eating, an interaction with someone in the house hours after she was supposedly asleep. It suggests the straight-to-bed narrative is false. It opens a window into the lost hours between midnight and 5:52 a.m. Who gave her the pineapple? Was it a parent, a brother, or the phantom intruder, casually helping himself to a snack? The pineapple does not point to a specific killer, but it points to a specific lie. It is the banality of the clue that gives it power. In the midst of a violent theatrical crime, the truth was hiding in a piece of fruit. It tells us that in the official story of that night, there is a missing scene. And in that missing scene, in a quiet kitchen under a single light, a little girl ate her last snack, unaware that the clock was now ticking down in her own stomach, preserving the evidence that would one day betray the story told about her death. Beyond DNA, there's a quieter, more pervasive form of evidence. Trace materials. Fibers. In a violent struggle, fibers from clothing, carpets, and blankets transfer. They weave an invisible web connecting people to places and objects. In the JonBenet case, this web became damning yet inconclusive. Crucial fibers linked Patsy Ramsey inextricably to the crime scene in ways she could never adequately explain. The jacket she wore that night, a red, black, and gray wool sweater, shed fibers that were found inside the knot of the garrote on the duct tape that had been placed over JonBenet's mouth, though not used to gag her, and on the blanket wrapped around her body. These were not random household fibers. They were microscopically consistent with that specific jacket. Patsy claimed she never went down to the basement that night, yet her fibers were in the heart of the violent staging. How did they get there? The defense argued transfer. John could have hugged Patsy, picked up her fibers, and then transferred them when he handled the body. But the placement, inside the tight, complex knot, argues for more direct contact. It suggests the person who tied that garrote was wearing that jacket, or had it very recently draped over them. Similarly, fibers from John Ramsey's favorite black shirt were found on his daughter's inner thighs, in an area associated with the assault. He had no explanation. These fibers are silent, but they shout. They form a constellation of contact that maps a different story than the one told. They are the antithesis of the unknown DNA. They are intimately known, and they point, with quiet persistence, to the people who lived in the house. They are the forensic answer to the behavioral profile. The mind may concoct a story, but the wool, the cotton, the nylon, they tell the truth of proximity, of contact, of involvement. They are the physical memory of the crime, clinging long after the conscious memory has crafted its alibi. The timeline is a skeleton of any homicide investigation. In this case, the skeleton is missing crucial bones. The Ramsey family timeline is firm. Home by 9:30, children to bed, parents to bed shortly after, asleep until the alarm of discovery. But the forensic clocks, the pineapple digestion, the estimated time of death, suggest activity deep into the night. So what happened in the lost hours? This is the void where every theory flourishes. The intruder theory needs time for entry, hiding, note writing, waiting the crime, and escape. The family theory needs time for whatever triggering event, the fatal blow, the panic, the elaborate staging, the writing of the novella-length note. Both require a period of intense, secret activity, while the rest of Boulder slept. Reconstructing these hours is like trying to map a darkroom by listening to echoes. A neighbor reported hearing a child's piercing scream around midnight, but it was never verified. The house was large, secluded by trees. It was a perfect container for secrets. Imagine the quiet of a post-Christmas home, the glow of lights on a tree, the silence of snow outside, and within it, a heart of pure chaos. Was someone tiptoeing down to the basement with a flashlight? Was someone sitting at a desk, chewing on a pen, composing a ransom note from movie fragments? Was a child being carried or led down those stairs? The lost hours are the black box of the case. If we could recover them, we would know everything. But time is the one witness that cannot be interviewed. It simply passes, erasing as it goes. Those 6 or 7 hours are the definitive cold spot in the investigation. They hold the why and the how. All we have is the what that was left behind at 5:52 a.m. The rest is a story told by evidence that cannot speak for itself. We are left building architectures of the unknowable, and every theory is a different blueprint for the same dark house. The ransom note was a handwritten manuscript, the obvious forensic step, compared to the handwriting of every possible suspect. This launched one of the most extensive handwriting analysis investigations in history. Patsy Ramsey's handwriting samples were, to many experts, strikingly similar. The formation of letters like the lowercase a and t, the slant, the spacing. Several experts hired by the prosecution concluded Patsy probably wrote the note. Others, including those hired by the defense, found significant differences and declared she could be excluded. Handwriting analysis is not a hard science like DNA. It is a craft, an interpretation. It sits in the gray area between art and evidence. The note writer may have been deliberately disguising their hand. Patsy, under stress, may have produced writing that varied from her norm. The result was a stalemate. No expert could stand in court and say, definitively, Patsy Ramsey wrote this. Nor could they say definitively she did not. The Boulder DA publicly stated Patsy could not be eliminated as the author. This was as close to an accusation as the science could get. The handwriting became a Rorschach test for the entire investigation. If you believed the parents were involved, the similarities were glaring. If you believed in an intruder, the differences were clear. The analysis created a perpetual motion machine of doubt. It was evidence that pointed, but never convicted. It was a whisper from the witness stand that everyone heard differently. And in the end, it remained as unresolved as the murder itself. A signature that promised an identity, but delivered only a maddening ambiguity. As years turned into decades, the public and media hunger for a resolution became a vacuum, sucking in the bizarre and the broken. The most spectacular example came in 2006, the arrest of John Mark Carr, a 41-year-old schoolteacher in Thailand. He had contacted a journalism professor with detailed graphic confessions to killing JonBenet. He claimed it was an accident during a sexual tryst. His knowledge of the case seemed intimate, gleaned from years of obsessive study. He was extradited to the U.S. amid a global media frenzy, and then it collapsed. His DNA did not match the unknown male profile. His whereabouts at the time of the murder could not be placed in Boulder. He was a fantasist, a man whose own psychological pathologies had merged with the mythology of the case. He was a perfect suspect for a world tired of waiting, a ready-made monster. But he was a fiction. The Carr episode was a cautionary tale about the dark allure of confession. It showed how the unsolved case becomes a magnet for the disturbed, a blank screen for projection. It also highlighted the danger of tunnel vision. For a brief, shining moment, the Boulder authorities thought they had their man. The world thought the mystery was over. But science, the final arbiter, said no. Carr was a ghost of a different kind, a ghost of the public's desperation. He walked onto the stage, delivered his monologue of guilt, and was ushered off, leaving the mystery deeper and darker than before. He proved that in the absence of answers, we will manufacture them, and that the most compelling story is not always the true one. Let's return to the DNA, the modern siren song of this case. It was entered into the combined DNA index system CODIS, the FBI's national database of convicted offenders and arrestees. For over 2 decades, it has produced no hits, no match to a known sex offender, a burglar, a violent criminal. In the mid-2010s, as genetic genealogy emerged, hope surged again. This technique uses the vast public genetic databases from ancestry companies to find familial relatives of an unknown suspect, building a family tree backwards to identify them. It has solved over 400 cold cases since 2018, including murders decades old. In 2021, Boulder police announced they had sent new items for advanced DNA testing. In 2023, the DA announced a new genetic genealogy partnership with a private lab. The headlines wrote themselves, JonBenet Ramsey case on the verge of breakthrough. But as of 2025, the silence is telling. The obstacles are formidable. The sample is tiny, degraded, and mixed. It may be a composite of multiple people's DNA, making genealogical sorting a nightmare. It may, as theorized, be a relevant manufacturing transfer. The very technology that has cracked so many cold cases may be powerless here. Not because the tech is lacking, but because the sample itself is a mirage. It promises an identity that may not exist. Every few years, the cycle renews. A new lab, a new technique, a new headline, a new wave of hope, followed by the slow sinking of disappointment. The DNA has become the torture of this case, offering a glimpse of scientific salvation, then snatching it away. It is the proof that in the 21st century, even our most powerful tools can be baffled by the chaos of a crime scene contaminated by time, touch, and tragedy. A murder investigation is a fragile organism in its first hours. The actions or inactions of the first responders dictate its entire future health. The Boulder Police Department's response on December 26, 1996, is now studied as a textbook example of what not to do. They treated the home as the site of a kidnapping, not a homicide. They failed to secure the scene. They allowed John Ramsey to search the house with a friend. They allowed Patsy to call friends and family, who descended upon the home, contaminating every surface with their fingerprints, footprints, and DNA. They did not immediately separate and interview the Ramseys. They let them leave the state for Atlanta days later. They did not obtain formal, detailed interviews for months. In their deference to a wealthy, influential family, they violated the core tenets of homicide investigation: isolate, secure, control. By the time they realized a murder had occurred in the basement, the crime scene, the entire house, was forensically obliterated. It was a symphony of good intentions with catastrophic results. The detectives were not corrupt. They were out of their depth, navigating a case of unimaginable pressure and weirdness. But their missteps created a virus of reasonable doubt that would infect every piece of evidence forever. The botched investigation theory is not an excuse. It is a diagnosis. It explains why, despite strong circumstantial evidence pointing in one direction, a prosecutor felt he could not win. The truth was still in that house at 5:52 a.m., but by noon it had been trampled, carried away, and whispered into oblivion by a dozen well-meaning hands. The first responders didn't just fail to find the killer. They failed to protect the very possibility of finding the killer. When physical evidence fails, investigators turn to the psychological landscape. A psychological autopsy isn't performed on the dead, but on the living, their relationships, their histories, their stresses. The Ramsey family system, under this lens, reveals fault lines, the pressure to maintain an image of perfection, the focus on JonBenét's pageant life, which some psychologists pathologize as inappropriate, the reported marital strains, the financial pressures of John's business, the strange dynamic of a brother somewhat sidelined by his sister's glittering routine. This is not evidence of murder, but it's the soil in which certain tragedies grow. Was there a hidden history of anger? Of inappropriate discipline? The psychological autopsy seeks the trigger. The Christmas holiday itself is a time of immense stress, financial burden, and family tension. Could a small spark, a bedwetting incident, JonBenet had a history, and a soiled pair of long johns was found in the bathroom, a sibling argument over a toy, a parental outburst, have ignited a catastrophic chain reaction? The proponents of an accident-covered-up theory rely heavily on the psychological map. They see not premeditated murder, but a perfect storm of stress, a momentary loss of control, and then a panicked, tragic choice to conceal rather than confess. It is a story about the lengths to which good people will go to preserve their world when it shatters. It asks us to look past the monster and see the human, frail and terrified, capable of a monstrous series of decisions in the shadow of one terrible mistake. The psychological autopsy provides a motive where the physical evidence provides only the method. It turns the house from a crime scene into a pressure cooker. And in that pressure cooker, something finally exploded. Lou Smith died in 2010, but his shadow stretches long over the case. He was not just an investigator. He was an evangelist for the intruder theory. He left behind a detailed presentation. How done it? That walks through the house with the eyes of his phantom. For Smith, the unanswered questions were proof of an outsider. Why would parents staging a kidnapping use a garrote from their own art supplies? Why would they leave the body in the house? Why wouldn't they dispose of it? His faith was in the unknown male DNA. He saw the case as a spiritual battle, with the Ramseys as righteous Job-like figures. Smith's legacy is powerful because it represents a detective as a believer in the face of overwhelming odds. He stood against the tide of suspicion and said, "You are looking in the wrong place." His work ensures that no theory can ever completely dominate. He planted the flag of reasonable doubt in the most fertile soil. Every documentary, every book, must grapple with Smith's points. He is the guardian of the mystery, the man who ensured it would never be neatly solved by pointing at the family. He built an elegant, haunting counter-narrative, and in doing so, he guaranteed the case will remain forever open, forever debated. His ghost still walks the basement of that house, pointing at the window, asking us to believe in the monster from outside, because the monster from inside is too terrible to contemplate. This case cannot be understood outside the context of wealth and privilege. The Ramseys were not just a family. They were an institution in Boulder. John was a successful CEO. They lived in a $1 million home. They moved in powerful social circles. This reality warped the investigation from minute one. Would the police have been so hesitant to separate and interrogate parents in a housing project? Would they have allowed the scene to be contaminated by friends if the family were poor? The perception, fair or not, is that the Ramseys' wealth and influence created a shield. They hired the best criminal defense attorneys in the country within days. They used the media as a tool. They navigated the legal system with a confidence born of resources. This fostered a deep public resentment and a conviction that there were two systems of justice. The case became a parable about class in America. It asked, does justice have a price tag? Could a wealthy family literally get away with murder? This narrative, whether completely accurate or not, is baked into the case's DNA as surely as the unknown male profile. It fueled the media frenzy and the public suspicion. It turned the legal process into a chess match between a well-funded defense and a floundering, politically cautious prosecution. The truth became not just a matter of evidence, but a matter of resources. And in that battle, the Ramseys, innocent or guilty, held all the strategic high ground from the very first day. Of the thousands of children killed in America since 1996, why does this one case hold us? The ingredients are a dark alchemy. The visual shock of the pageant videos, which tapped into deep-seated cultural anxieties about the sexualization of little girls. The Gothic setting of a grand home at Christmas, the ultimate symbol of safety and joy, violated. The bizarre, almost literary clues, the ransom note, the cryptic SPTC, the garrote, the whodunit structure with a limited cast of characters, the perfect ambiguity of the evidence, allowing anyone to build a satisfying theory. John Bonet ceased to be a real child and became a symbol of lost innocence, of hidden family rot, of media voyeurism, of investigative failure. The case is a mirror. We see in it what we fear most, that evil can invade the safest place, the intruder theory, or that evil can fester within the safest place, the family theory. It is a Rorschach test of our collective paranoia. It is also a story that never ends. With no arrest, no trial, no verdict, the narrative is perpetually unfinished. We can keep picking at the scab, finding new angles, new suspects, new analyses. It is the ultimate cold case because it is also the ultimate story. And we are not ready for the story to end, because the ending, whatever it is, will be more terrible than the mystery. In the 21st century, the investigation moved from the evidence room to the internet. Forums, subreddits, dedicated websites, and podcasts became digital cold case squads. Web sleuths dissected every scanned document, enhanced every photo, debated every fiber. This crowdsourcing has produced both insight and insanity. It has applied fresh eyes to old problems. It has also spawned conspiracy theories, harassed innocent people, including Burke Ramsey, and created a noise floor speculation that often drowns out signal. The digital age democratized the investigation, for better and worse. It ensures the case never goes cold in the public mind. It also creates a parallel universe of facts, where grainy enhanced images prove things professional analysts missed. This hive mind is a force now recognized by law enforcement, sometimes helpful, often a hindrance. In the Ramsey case, it has become the permanent global grand jury, constantly in session, delivering verdicts based on the latest viral theory. It is a living, breathing legacy of the media storm now powered by algorithms and echo chambers. The truth is still in Boulder, but the search for it is now conducted on screens everywhere by millions of amateur detectives armed with nothing but curiosity and a Wi-Fi connection. Let's play a dark game. What if John Ramsey had not touched the body? What if the police had immediately sealed the house and separated the family? What if the DNA had been a clean, full profile? Each of these forks in the road leads to a different universe. In one, perhaps a fiber map so clean it convicts. In another, a DNA match to a factory worker in Taiwan, collapsing the intruder theory. In another, a confession extracted under early pressure. The what-ifs are the ghosts of this case. They are the paths not taken, the evidence not lost, the questions asked in time. They haunt every detective who worked the case, every prosecutor who reviewed it. They are a lesson in the fragility of truth. A single decision to lift a body, to not secure a door, can bend the course of justice forever. The John Bonet case is a monument to the what-if. It shows how a cascade of small errors can create an impenetrable fog. It asks us to consider how much of what we call truth is merely the story that survived the chaos of its own discovery. For the detectives, the prosecutors, the journalists, the web sleuths, and the public, this case leaves an existential stain. It is the enduring presence of the unresolved. It is knowledge that a perfect narrative of guilt and innocence may never be written. We are a species that craves closure, that needs stories that have endings. The John Bonet case denies us that. It forces us to live with ambiguity, with competing truths, with the haunting possibility that we will never know. For the Ramsey family, John, who lost a wife and a daughter, Burke, who lost a sister in a childhood, the stain is the permanent cloud of suspicion. They are forever trapped in the amber of that December morning, forever defendants in a trial that will never be adjudicated. They can proclaim their innocence until they die, and a segment of the world will never believe them. That is their life sentence. The case is a wound that cannot heal because it cannot be cleaned. It just sits open, a reminder of the limits of our justice, our science, and our understanding of the human heart in extremis. So we arrive at the end, or rather, the perpetual middle. We are left with the artifacts, the note, the garrote, the pineapple, the DNA, and those 4 letters, SBTC saved by the cross, sealed by the cops, Santa Bilda. It is a case's final, unbreakable cipher. It is a killer's or the stager's signature, a last laugh flung into the future. It means something to someone, or it meant nothing, a random flourish. It is the perfect symbol of the entire endeavor, a message that promises meaning but delivers only a void. This case is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a labyrinth to be walked, and with every turn you are confronted not just with evidence, but with yourself. Who do you believe? The hysterical mother on the phone, or the enhanced audio track? The grieving father, or the fiber evidence on his daughter's clothes? The gentle old detective preaching of an intruder, or the cold statistical profile of family homicide? You are the jury now. The trial is in your mind, and the verdict you reach says as much about you as it does about the facts. The terror of the John Bonet Ramsey case is not that a child was murdered. The world is full of murdered children, a tragedy so common it defies comprehension. The terror is that in this one singular case, with all the resources, all the attention, all the decades of technological advancement, we still cannot say for certain what happened in that house. We have turned her body into a crime scene, her home into a museum of doubt, her memory into a battlefield of theories. The answer is not in the DNA. It is in the dark space between the head blow and the garrote. It is in the silent hours between midnight and dawn. It is in the mind of someone who looked at a little girl and saw a problem to be erased or a tragedy to be disguised. The John Bonet Ramsey case did more than haunt the public. It sent shockwaves through the very infrastructure of American law enforcement. It became a cautionary tale taught at the FBI Academy and in homicide investigation seminars. The phrase, "don't pull a boulder," became shorthand for the catastrophic failure to secure a scene. In its wake, protocols were rewritten. The concept of the presumptive crime scene was strengthened. Treat every suspicious death as a homicide until proven otherwise, and every missing person report as a potential crime scene. The deference shown to the Ramsey family, allowing them to invite friends over to leave the state, is now seen as an unthinkable breach. This case, perhaps more than any other in the late 20th century, highlighted the brutal necessity of treating everyone, regardless of social status, as a potential subject in the first critical hours. It also accelerated the adoption of more rigorous evidence logging and chain of custody procedures. The realization that a single touch could ruin a case became a forensic mantra. Furthermore, the bizarre nature of the ransom note spurred deeper collaboration between the FBI's behavioral analysts and local agencies on day one, rather than as an afterthought. The case's legacy is etched in the cold, hard protocols of modern policing. It is a ghost in the machine of every major investigation, a voice whispering to the first officer on the scene. Secure everything. Trust nothing. The truth is fragile, and it is fleeing right now. The autopsy report is a clinical poem of trauma, but medicine evolves. Reading Dr. Meyer's 1996 findings with 2025 knowledge opens new lines of inquiry. The head wound, for instance. Modern biomechanical modeling could now simulate the force, angle, and likely implement with greater precision, testing the flashlight theory against other household objects. The petechial hemorrhages in the eyes and face, classic signs of strangulation, are now understood in more nuanced gradients of timing and pressure. Could the hemorrhage pattern distinguish between a slow, staged tightening and a rapid, violent assault? The chronic inflammation noted in JonBenét's vaginal tissue, a point of endless, grim debate. Would today be contextualized by a deeper understanding of pediatric gynecology and the many non-abusive causes for such conditions, though the acute injury present that night remained? Modern toxicology screens, far more sensitive, might have detected trace sedatives if any had been used, a theory often speculated but never proven. The re-examination isn't about overturning facts, but about asking new questions of the old evidence. It's about applying the language of 2025 forensic science to the body's 1996 testimony. Would it change the core findings? Unlikely, but it might sharpen the timeline, clarify the sequence of injuries, and close some of the speculative doors that have swung open for decades. The body has spoken, but we are only now learning to hear all its syllables. The house at 755 15th Street is not just a location. It is a character. Its layout, the 4 floors, the maze-like basement, the separate wings for parents and children, dictated the possibilities of the crime. Behavioral geographers and environmental psychologists can map a crime scene for psychological clues. The choice of the wine cellar, a hidden, windowless room, versus the more open boiler room or laundry area, speaks to a need for concealment, for a kind of grim privacy. The journey from JonBenét's 3rd floor bedroom to the basement is a long one, down a spiral staircase, past the kitchen, through the butler's pantry, down the steep basement stairs. It is a journey that required either a compliant child, an unconscious one, or a forced one. Did the killer know the house well enough to navigate this in the dark? The placement of the ransom note on the spiral staircase, a visual centerpiece impossible to miss, was a piece of theater for an audience of one. The person coming downstairs first, mapping the movements theorized in each scenario, intruder versus family, creates 2 different psychological landscapes. One is a path of a predator exploring, hiding, and ultimately fleeing. The other is a path of a resident in panic, moving between familiar nodes of crisis. The bedroom, the kitchen for pineapple for the pen and pad, the basement for the paintbrush for the hidden room. The house holds the ghost of that path. Its geography is a frozen record of a single, terrible journey, and the route taken reveals the traveler's intimate knowledge, or lack thereof, of the terrain. Christmas, the season of unlocked doors, of guests, of strangers in red suits. The Ramseys had attended a party that evening. They had also hosted a Christmas home tour earlier in the month, where dozens, even hundreds, of strangers had walked through their house. This seasonal context is critical. It expands the suspect pool in a way no other time of year could. An intruder could have cased the home during the tour. A guest at the party could have observed routines. The Santa Claus figure himself, a family friend named Bill McReynolds who played Santa at Ramsey parties, became an object of fascination, though he was thoroughly vetted and cleared. The Christmas backdrop feeds the intruder theory with a plausible vector of access and knowledge. It also feeds a family theory with a catalyst of immense stress. The financial strain of gifts, the social performances, the disruption of routine, the heightened emotions, the murder weapon's connection to the holiday, the paintbrush from Patsy's hobby supplies, perhaps used for wrapping presents, ties the violence to the domestic fabric of the season. The ransom note's dramatic flair reads like a perverse Christmas story. The case is soaked in the iconography of the holiday, making the violation feel even more profound. It happened not in the dead of a random July night, but in the silent, expectant early hours of December 26th, when the world was supposed to be soft with magic and new toys. The season isn't a sidebar, it's the canvas. The crime is a slash of black painted across a painting of snow and twinkling lights. Burke Ramsey's life is a unique experiment in modern notoriety. He was a child when the crime occurred, interviewed briefly by child psychologists and deemed not a suspect. But as an adult, he has been tried and convicted in the court of viral opinion. The 2016 documentary that forcefully advanced the Burke Did It theory, featuring enhanced audio and body language experts, ignited a new firestorm. Burke's later interviews on Dr. Phil, where his smiling demeanor was pathologized by armchair psychologists, added fuel. The internet dissected every frame, every tick. This is a form of lifelong trauma, distinct from the loss of his sister. He is perpetually the what-if boy. The digital age has denied him the obscurity that might have been possible in an earlier time. Every public record, every old photo, is scanned for clues. This phenomenon raises a dark question about our own complicity. In our hunger to solve the puzzle, have we created a second victim? The evidence against Burke is entirely circumstantial and interpretative. The pineapple, the 911 voice, the rumor of feces-smearing behavior, his later demeanor, there is no direct physical evidence linking him to the murder. Yet, for millions, the theory is fact. Burke Ramsey lives in a prison of global suspicion, one built not with bars, but with bandwidth and theory. His experience is a dark parable for the internet age. When a mystery remains open, the crowd will appoint its own villain, and due process is replaced by the dopamine hit of a compelling narrative. Beyond handwriting, the ransom note is a treasure trove for forensic linguistics. The study of language as evidence. Its 372 words can be data mined for psycholinguistic markers. The use of movie quotes suggests a mind that processes reality through cinematic filters, perhaps a younger person or someone with a less grounded sense of real-world crime. The excessive use of imperative sentences, listen carefully, speak to no one, signals a need to control the narrative. The phrase and hence is a formal, almost archaic construction that stood out to investigators. It was a phrase Patsy Ramsey was known to use. The demand for $118,000, not a round figure, indicates specific personal knowledge. The odd salutation Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, instead of Mr. Ramsey, could hint at a focus on or resentment toward the mother. The closing SBTC victory has the tone of a signature for a club or a game, a childish or grandiose flourish. Computational analysis can compare the note's syntactic structures, word frequency, and punctuation patterns to known writing samples. While not conclusive, this analysis builds a profile, an author familiar with the family, prone to dramatics, possibly female, possibly writing under immense stress that cause regression to a more formal or imitative style. The note isn't just a message, it's a linguistic fingerprint. And while it doesn't point to a single name, it draws a startlingly detailed outline of the person who sat in that kitchen, filling the page with borrowed menace. As of 2025, the Department of Justice estimates nearly 250,000 homicides in the United States remain unsolved since 1980. The clearance rate for homicide has dropped from over 90% in the 1960s to around 50% today. Where does the JonBenet case sit within this frozen landscape? It is an outlier in almost every way. Most cold cases involve victims from marginalized communities, with minimal media attention and investigative resources expended. JonBenet's case had the opposite. A white, affluent victim, a global media frenzy, and millions of dollars spent, yet remains unsolved. This paradox highlights a brutal truth. Resources and attention don't guarantee resolution if the initial investigative foundation is flawed. The case also defies the typical cold case breakthrough model. Most are solved today via DNA hits or a deathbed confession. The DNA here is ambiguous, and a confession, if it ever comes, would be from one of a very small, closely guarded circle, unlikely to suddenly fracture decades later. The Ramsey case is a monument to a specific kind of failure, not of effort, but a foundational technique. It sits in the cold case files not as a forgotten folder, but as a glaring, well-lit exhibit of how the first hours can predetermine the next 30 years. It's a reminder that in the economy of justice, you can't buy back lost time. Where official investigation fails, the unofficial rushes in. The JonBenet case spawned an entire cottage industry of psychics, mediums, and spiritualists claiming to have visions of the killer. Some described a dark man in the basement. Others sensed a woman in red. Some pointed to non-existent tunnels. Law enforcement is routinely flooded with such tips, which consume resources and lead nowhere. This phenomenon is about more than gullibility. It's about the human need to fill a vacuum with something, even if it's supernatural. The case's inherent weirdness, the note, the garrote, the pageant angle, makes it feel like a gothic novel, inviting supernatural explanation. The psychics provide a form of narrative closure that the facts deny. They offer a story complete with character and motive, where there is only mystery. This industry thrives on the unresolved. It is a shadow investigation, running parallel to the forensic one, powered by emotion and intuition rather than evidence. It reveals less about the crime and more about our collective desperation for an answer, any answer that feels intuitively true. In the face of a labyrinth, some will always choose to believe in a guide who claims to see over the walls, even if that guide is walking in the dark themselves. The story of JonBenet Ramsey is now as much a story of documentaries as a detective work. From the early CBS docuseries to the explosive 2016 film to countless podcast deep dives, each retelling shapes the public's understanding. These aren't neutral recitations. They are arguments. The 2016 documentary was a prosecutorial brief against Burke. Lou Smith's own video presentation is a defense attorney's closing argument for an intruder. Each production chooses its evidence, its experts, its cliffhangers. They create truth through editing and music. This meta layer has permanently altered the case. For generations who weren't alive in 1996, the documentary they see first becomes a foundational truth. The actual police reports are less influential than a well-cut interview. This raises a profound epistemological problem. When the facts are in dispute, does the most compelling narrative become the de facto truth? The documentary era has turned the case into a choose-your-own-adventure mystery, where you can select a theory that fits your worldview. The search for objective truth is now filtered through the subjective lens of storytelling. The evidence hasn't changed, but the way we experience the evidence has fractured into 1,000 competing realities, each playing on a screen somewhere in the world. We end not with a bang, but with a perpetual whisper. The JonBenet Ramsey case is an unfinished sentence. The subject is known, a murder. The verb is known, was committed, but the object, the who, the precise why, is a blank space that has absorbed 30 years of ink and theory and tears. To live in the aftermath of such a mystery is to live with a permanent cognitive itch, a sense that the world is out of order. For Boulder, it's a stain on the city's self-image of progressive, sunny safety. For the detectives who worked it, it's a career-defining shadow, a ghost they can never catch. For the true crime community, it's the ultimate white whale, a puzzle that promises a satisfaction solution, but delivers only the addiction of a hunt. And for us, the audience, the listeners in the dark, it is a mirror held up to our own relationship with evil. Do we need evil to be a stranger, a small foreign faction, slipping through a window? Or can we accept that it might be domestic, banal, born of a flash of rage in a kitchen? The case forces us to choose our monster, and in that choice, we reveal our own fears about the world and the people we share our homes with. The latest genetic genealogy push will likely end, as the others have, in a press release thanking the public for its patience. The case will officially remain open, and the artifacts, the notepad, the flashlight, the size 12 Bloomies, will sit in their climate-controlled boxes, waiting for a technology that doesn't yet exist, or for a conscience that finally cracks under the weight of a secret kept for a lifetime. The haunting truth of the JonBenet Ramsey case may be this. Some doors, once closed, can never be fully reopened. Some stories, once corrupted at their source, can never be told truly. We are left with fragments, with echoes, with a collection of what-ifs that form a monument not to a child, but to the terrifying elusiveness of truth itself. The house on 15th Street has new owners. The spiral staircase remains. The basement room is surely used for storage. Life relentlessly moves on, but in the quiet of a Colorado night, if you listen past the wind in the pine trees, you can almost hear it. The echo of a mystery that refused to be solved, a sentence that will never find its period, a single word, hanging in the silent, cold air. Why?